Settle in, take a slow breath. Let the air fill your lungs gently, then release it just as softly. Imagine yourself laying back, safe and quiet, as we step together into a story of the past. Tonight, we will drift into a period when unease sat heavy in the hearts of millions. It was the mid-19th century, in the years just before the American Civil War. A time when the nation seemed restless, pulled apart by disputes over slavery, politics, and identity. Writers of the time sometimes spoke of a demon of unrest, an invisible presence that haunted towns, plantations, cities, and farms alike. It was not a single event or a single person, but rather a Muda cloud that settled across the land. We will explore this turbulent period, not with noise or urgency, but gently. Piece by piece, detail by detail, as if walking through the dim rooms of an old house, noticing the worn furniture, the faint smell of wood smoke, the faded portraits on the walls. Our journey will move in 4 parts. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of ordinary people in these unsettled years, their routines, their work, their quiet moments. Then, we will step into the life of a figure who stood at the center of the storm. After that, we will turn to a mystery of the age, something uncertain, debated, and glimpsed only through fragments. And finally, we will explore how life looked from another angle, the perspective of elites. The purpose of this exploration is not to stir us into agitation, but to soothe. By looking carefully at a world filled with unrest, we allow ourselves to better appreciate the calm of our present moment. So, close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin. Imagine yourself in the 1850s, somewhere in the American countryside. The world is quieter than ours, no hum of electricity, no distant automobiles, only the steady rhythms of nature and human labor. At dawn, a rooster crows, and the first rays of sunlight slant through a cabin's small window. A wooden floor creaks under bare feet as someone rises from their bed, perhaps made of straw-filled ticking. The air is cool and still heavy with night. In the north, life in a small farming community is dictated by the land and the seasons. Men and women move about their work in silence or with soft conversation, fetching water from a well, stoking the embers of last night's fire, kneading dough for bread. The smell of smoke clings to clothing, the kind of scent so common it is barely noticed. Children might be sent to gather eggs, their hands chilled from the morning air. The day stretches before them, filled with labor, yet marked by simple rituals. In towns, shopkeepers lift the wooden shutters from their storefronts. The sound of iron hinges scraping is followed by the ring of a small bell as a door opens. Shelves are stacked with bolts of cloth, jars of molasses, and tins of tea imported from faraway ports. News arrives slowly, printed in small local papers or passed from traveler to traveler on dusty roads. Even in towns, the pace is unhurried compared to our present age. Farther south, on plantations, the mornings begin differently, but still with routine. Enslaved people rise before the sun, often in small cabins crowded with families. Their day is mapped out not by choice but by command, stretching from the first light to well past dusk. The field's waitrose of cotton, tobacco, or sugar cane. The rhythm of their lives is both exhausting and relentless. Yet, within that rhythm, they find small, precious pauses. A whispered story, a song carried softly through the air. A moment of laughter despite the crushing weight of bondage. Meals, for many, are plain but filling: cornbread, salted pork, beans, seasonal vegetables. For wealthier families, tables are heavier with food: roast meats, sweet preserves, strong coffee. The contrast is sharp, yet the same sun rises over both rich and poor, enslaved and free, bathing them in the same morning light. Evenings bring another pattern. Lanterns are lit, their glow dim and golden. In rural cabins, families gather around the fire, the sound of crickets humming outside. In town parlors, chairs are drawn close to the hearth as letters are read aloud or books are shared. In the South, enslaved families return to their cabins, sometimes singing hymns together, voices blending into a chorus of endurance. These evenings offer the briefest space to rest, though always shadowed by uncertainty. Underlying all of this is the quiet sense of tension. Newspapers carry more and more headlines about abolition, about politics, about disputes between states. Neighbors might whisper in hushed tones, testing whether they share the same opinions. A single remark at a church gathering or market stall could reveal deep divides. Yet, for the most part, life continues outwardly, as it always has. Cows are milked, bread is baked, tools are mended. The rhythm of life beats on, steady and familiar, even as the invisible demon of unrest coils ever tighter around the land. When you picture this world, it is not one of constant chaos, but one of daily steadiness, shadowed by unease. A people trying to live ordinary lives while sensing that something larger, more difficult, was pressing in from the horizon. And so, with this glimpse into the everyday life of the 1850s, we begin to feel the presence of that unease quietly humming beneath the surface of daily routine. Soon, we will turn from the common person to one figure who stood amid this gathering storm. Man whose life was inseparable from the unrest of his age. As we shift from the quiet rhythms of ordinary life, let us turn our attention to one figure who came to embody the unrest of his time. His name was John Brown, and though he was born into the humble life of a tanner's son, his path would lead him toward a role that unsettled an entire nation. Picture him as a young boy in the early years of the 19th century. He grows up in the rugged countryside of Connecticut and later Ohio, surrounded by the sounds of hammers on leather, the smell of hides soaking in vats. His father's trade is steady, but what sets young John apart is not the work of his hands, but the intensity of his convictions. From an early age, he hears sermons and discussions about morality, sin, and the great national issue of slavery. For him, this is not an abstract matter, is a moral wound, a festering wrong that, he believes, must one day be cleansed. As he matures, Brown is not a wealthy man. He drifts through various trades: farming, surveying, land deals, and even sheep breeding. Some ventures fail, some succeed briefly, but none make him secure. What remains constant is his deepening commitment to ending slavery. He is not alone in this conviction. Abolitionists exist in many towns and cities, but Brown is unusual in the fervor with which he clings to the idea that only bold, even violent, action will break the chains of bondage. Imagine him in the 1840s and 1850s, growing older, his beard now flecked with gray, his brow furrowed with both hardship and determination. The newspapers of the time buzz that whispered through markets and churchyards the expansion of slavery into new territories, the compromises debated in Congress, the bitter arguments between North and South. Brown watches these developments not with patience but with frustration. To him, time itself feels complicities. Day slavery continues. Countless lives remain in chains. The place where his convictions erupt most vividly is in the territory of Kansas. There, settlers clash over whether the land will enter the Union as free or slave. Violence flares. Homes are burned. Men are dragged from their beds. Brown enters the scene with his sons, taking up arms in what becomes known as Bleeding Kansas. To some, he is a defender of liberty, meeting fire with fire. To others, he is a fanatic, dangerously inflamed. What cannot be denied is that his presence intensifies the unrest already seething in the land. Years pass, and Brown conceives a plan, one both audacious and desperate. He imagines striking a blow at slavery, not through speeches or petitions, but through an armed rising. His vision is of enslaved men and women throwing off their chains, joining in a movement that would spread across the South, dismantling the institution at its root. To begin this, he chooses a federal armory at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. On a quiet October night in 1859, Brown and a small band of followers, some his own sons, others fellow believers, creep toward the town. Picture the stillness of that autumn evening, the chill in the air, the sound of boots crunching softly on dirt, the dark outline of the arsenal against the moonlit sky. They move with both hope and dread, for they know the odds are thin, yet they press forward, convinced of their cause. What follows is confusion, alarm, and eventually the clash of forces. Local militia and U.S. Marines surround the armory. Shots echo across the town, bouncing off brick and stone. Brown and his men hold out, but the walls close in. Some are killed, others captured. Brown himself is taken alive, wounded but unyielding. In the days that follow, he stands trial. The courtroom is filled with murmurs, the air heavy with both curiosity and fear. His words, calm and deliberate, strike many as prophetic. He does not beg for mercy. Instead, he declares that he acted for the oppressed, and that, if his life must end, so be it. To some, he becomes a martyr, to others, a madman. But either way, he becomes a symbol proof of how deeply the demon of unrest had burrowed into the heart of the nation. On the morning of December 2nd, 1859, John Brown is led to the gallows. The sky is said to have been crisp and clear. Soldiers stand watch. Crowds gather in silence. And as the trapdoor falls, a hush spreads through the land. It is not simply the end of one man, but a sign that something larger is at hand, something that no gallows could contain. In the quiet that followed, the nation did not find peace. Instead, Brown's memory lingered like a ghost, stirring debates, inspiring songs, and haunting the halls of power. Some spoke of him as a saint, others as a murderer, but all felt his presence. In the stillness of his absence, the demon of unrest only grew stronger. And so, we leave John Brown at the threshold of history, his life a fragment of the larger unease that would soon spill into open conflict. Next, we will turn from the story of a single man to the mysteries and uncertainties that shadowed this period, questions of archaeology, culture, and memory that remain debated even today. When we think of unrest, we often imagine battles, fiery speeches, and dramatic events. But unrest also leaves quieter traces, stories, fragments of memory, and questions that historians still ponder. The 1850s and 1860s in America were filled with these fragments, some of which remain with us like faint echoes, reminding us of the uncertainty that once blanketed the land. One such trace can be found in the letters and diaries of the time. Imagine an attic trunk, discovered many decades later, filled with papers browned at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. A farmer in Pennsylvania writes of neighbors debating politics at the tavern, their words calm at first, then heated. A young woman in Virginia describes the unease of hearing rumors, the talk of John Brown, the talk of war. To the writer, these were simply notes on daily life, but to us, they are small windows into a world overshadowed by tension. Each letter is both ordinary and extraordinary, a fragment of a mind caught in the storm. Archaeology, too, plays its part in uncovering this era. Excavations at old homesteads and campsites reveal broken clay pipes, buttons from uniforms, shards of pottery, even children's marbles. On their own, they may seem unremarkable, but together they sketch out the rhythms of lives lived in uncertainty. A chipped mug might have once held coffee sipped during whispered conversations about secession. A bent nail might have been hammered into the frame of a house, even as news of conflict spread. Such objects remind us that great unrest is experienced not only in speeches and armies, but in kitchens, bedrooms, and backyards. And then there are the songs, perhaps the most mysterious legacy of all. Enslaved people carried melodies across fields and rivers, songs layered with meanings that outsiders often failed to understand. Some were spirituals, calling upon deliverance, others encoded with hidden messages, guiding steps along the Underground Railroad. To hear them was to sense both sorrow and hope woven together, a kind of living archaeology of sound. These songs drifted into the night air, mingling with the chirping of insects and the rustle of wind through trees, carrying with them the deep endurance of a people living under bondage. Even today, there are mysteries about how these songs were shared, altered, and remembered. Was a melody passed from one plantation to another by word of mouth, reshaped slightly each time? Did certain lyrics hold coded instructions toward safe houses, rivers to follow, landmarks to watch for. Historians debate, but the truth is elusive. Wrapped in the silence of those who could never write their knowledge openly, what remains is the haunting sense of resilience, a culture preserved, not on paper, but in breath and voice. Another mystery lingers in the political symbols of the age. Flags, for instance, carried enormous weight. Some families stitched banners in secret, unveiling them at rallies that ended in hushed dispersal when tempers grew too hot. Others flew flags boldly from their homes, declaring allegiance to union or states' rights. Today, fragments of these banners survive in museums, faded cloth, frayed seams, colors dulled by time. To hold such a relic is to feel the faint pulse of a long-ago anxiety, stitched into fabric by hands long gone. And then there is the mystery of silence itself. For all the letters, songs, and artifacts, much remains unknown. What did the majority truly feel as the nation edged toward fracture? Did farmers in the Midwest think constantly of politics, or only occasionally when the news reached them? Did enslaved families whisper of freedom each night, or did they conserve hope quietly in moments too fragile to share? These are questions without complete answers, shadows that remind us that history is never fully illuminated. The cultural memory of this time remains unsettled, just as the people who lived through it were unsettled. Archaeologists continue to sift the soil of Kansas homesteads, discovering musket balls and scorched beams, while archivists pore over fragile newspapers that crumble at the touch. Each discovery adds a thread, but the larger fabric is always incomplete, leaving room for speculation, imagination, and wonder. As you picture these relics, letters resting in boxes, songs floating on the air, fragments of banners folded away, let them settle quietly in your mind. They are whispers from the past, reminding us of lives yet filled with resilience, with endurance, and with moments of ordinary humanity. And now, having lingered among these traces and mysteries, we will turn to our final segment. There we will look at life from another angle, not the daily grind of common people, nor the struggles of a lone figure, nor the haunting remnants of memory, but the world of the elite and powerful, those whose experiences stood in sharp contrast, yet were equally shaped by the demon of unrest. While the majority of Americans in the 1850s lived in modest homes, working farms or fields, there existed another world, one of spacious parlors, candlelit dinners, and polished speeches in the halls of power. To understand the demon of unrest, it is helpful to step briefly into that contrasting world, where life looked outwardly serene, yet was equally marked by unease. Imagine a grand home in a southern city, perhaps Charleston or Richmond. The house stands tall, with white columns, wide verandas, and polished wooden floors that creak under the weight of fine rugs. Chandeliers drip with glass pendants, catching the flicker of candlelight. In the evening, families of planters gather around long dining tables. Platters of roasted meats and sugared fruits are set out, and silver goblets glint in the warm glow. Servants move quietly through the room, filling glasses and carrying dishes, their presence a constant reminder of the institution that underpinned the wealth of the household. After dinner, the men often retire to the library or veranda, where tobacco smoke curls into the night air. Newspapers are unfolded. Discussions begin about tariffs, about speeches given in Washington, about the threat of abolition. Voices are calm, measured, yet beneath the polished words lies an undercurrent of fear. What would happen if the system on which their wealth depended were dismantled? For many in these circles, unrest was not merely a political disagreement. It was a threat to their very way of life. In the North, the elite world had a different flavor. Picture the drawing rooms of Boston or New York, filled with velvet drapes and shelves lined with books imported from Europe. Tea is served in delicate china cups, and the conversations lean toward reform, commerce, and literature. Wealthy industrialists and merchants debate the morality of slavery, yet also consider the stability of markets, the flow of goods, the preservation of the Union for them. Unrest was troubling, but also abstract, something they read about in papers or heard in speeches, rather than felt in the soil of their fields. Political leaders, too, lived in this atmosphere of contrast. In Washington, D.C., the Capitol's white dome gleamed against the sky, unfinished but impressive. Inside, men in dark coats and polished boots debated endlessly. The language was formal, the gestures deliberate. Yet, beneath the surface, their disagreements were sharp and often bitter. Compromises were crafted only to be broken. Some leaders spoke passionately for unity, others for the rights of states. Each speech was followed by applause or muttering, but the demon of unrest lingered in the chamber, invisible yet undeniable. For the wives and daughters of these households, life carried its own contrasts. In the South, women of the elite oversaw the management of large homes, correspondence, and social visits. They hosted teas and dances, their gowns made of silks and satins, their hair carefully arranged. Yet even in these rituals of refinement, there was unease. Rumors whispered at the edge of gatherings, news arriving of uprisings, escapes, and political turmoil. In the North, women of elite families increasingly engaged in reform movements, abolition, temperance, education. They held salons where essays were read aloud and ideas exchanged. Their voices growing stronger in the public sphere, though always within certain bounds. And beyond politics and society, there was always culture, the arts, literature, and leisure of the wealthy. In grand parlors, pianos played gentle tunes. In theaters, actors performed Shakespeare or newly written American dramas, their words echoing beneath painted ceilings. In lecture halls, authors spoke of moral duty or progress, drawing crowds who listened intently. To an observer, these moments of refinement might appear far removed from the hardships of farmers or the toil of enslaved laborers. Yet all were bound together by the same approaching storm, though felt in vastly different ways. This was the great contrast of the age. Some lived with constant grinding labor, while others sipped wine in candlelit halls. Some carried the chains of bondage, while others fretted over the preservation of privilege. Yet none could escape the shadow entirely. Whether in a cabin, a tavern, a parlor, or the capital, the sense of uneasy, demon of unrest, was present, hovering at the edges of each conversation, each meal, each quiet night. And so, as we step out of these contrasting worlds, we prepare to close our journey. The ordinary, the extraordinary, the mysterious, and the privileged, though shared a landscape soon to be reshaped by war. But for now, we leave them in their quiet moments, their lamplight evenings, their whispered conversations, the brink, but not yet beyond it. And now, as we come to the end of our time together, let us pause and look back at the world we have gently walked through. We began with the everyday lives of ordinary people in the 1850s, their mornings filled with the sound of roosters, the smell of wood smoke, the rhythm of bread baking, tools mending, and lanterns glowing at night. Lives steady and familiar, yet shadowed by a quiet unease. We stepped then into the story of John Brown, a man who carried his convictions with a weight so heavy that they pushed him toward desperate action. His life became a symbol, and his death a haunting, stirring figure across the landscape of unrest. We wandered next among the fragments and mysteries of the time letters browned with age, songs carried on the night air, fragments of banners, shards of pottery, and silences we can never fully decipher. These relics reminded us that history is not only written in bold headlines, but whispered in small traces that survive by chance. And finally, we lingered in parlors and dining halls, among the elite who lived lives of refinement, wealth, and privilege contrasting sharply with the hardship of others. Yet even they, in their candlelit rooms and in the polished chambers of Washington, could not escape the demon of unrest that lingered in every corner of the nation. As we leave these rooms, these cabins, these fields and parlors behind, we return to the present. The unrest that gripped that world eventually erupted into war, reshaping the nation in ways its people could scarcely imagine. But here, in our quiet moment, we are free to simply observe, to let the past drift by like scenery glimpsed through a slow-moving window. The struggles of those who lived before us are part of a long human story, one of conflict, endurance, and change. Yet, tonight, you do not need to carry their burden. You can let their world fade softly back into history, knowing it is distant, safely behind us. Now, as you rest, notice the calm of your own surroundings, the comfort of your bed, the softness of the air, the gentle rhythm of your own breath. The demon of unrest belongs to another age, another time. For you, here and now, there is only peace. So, allow your mind to grow quiet, like a lantern dimming, like a hearth fire settling into embers. Let your thoughts drift as softly as autumn leaves falling in still air. The past has told its story, and your present is one of calm. Sleep well, and let history watch over your dreams.